Welcome to the hat series. This part 2 of the series, we're going to be making a toque, which is a very Canadian hat. Hopefully you can see. And it's snowing, and a toque is basically a brimless hat that keeps your head warm in this sort of weather. As you can see, it's snowing. So stay tuned.
The first thing we need for our pattern is, we need a piece of paper that is 9 inches by 23 inches, so 11 and a half, folded in half. So 9 by 23 inches, and we want to fold it in half. Then we are going to measure. We need our seam allowance. I'm using a 1/2 inch. So I've marked the seam allowance. Then we're going to fold this so you're taking your folded edge. Keep your paper flat. You can use newspaper or whatever you have. This is like tissue paper. So you fold it to the seam allowance. So then we're going to measure from the fold line and the seam allowance here 3/4 of an inch. Same on this side. So 3/4 of an inch here and 3/4 inch here from each fold. Then we are going to measure we got to fold it in half first. No, wrong way. So you're going to fold it in half to your seam line or sewing allowance. And we need to measure, how far is it? I can't remember. 3 1/4. So then we're going to put a mark there. So we have it folded in half. So we fold it to our seam allowance, mark our 3/4 from the top each fold line, and we're going to fold it in half again. And I'm going to use a curved edge. You could just draw a line. Oh, you can't even see what I'm doing. So I'm using this curved edge. You want it to go outwards. You could use a protractor. You just want, or the edge of a plate. Just want a slight curve on there. Like so. I need a bigger marker. Can't see that line at all. Ooh, noisy marker. Alright, so now we have our line. I'm going to take a pair of scissors. And I'm going to cut it. So then your pattern piece should look like that. So we cut that out of the top. So this is your fold line. So when you unfold it, it should look like that. Or did I do this wrong? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. That's right. So, we have that. Now we need a band, and it needs to be 9.5. I need a new piece of paper. 9.5 by 11.5 on the fold. Then you need this. Alright, let's cut out our hat. Okay, now I'm going to make my toque out of a recycled sweater. Old sweater that I had laying around. It's partially wool, I believe. What does it say? Can't I even read the label? Oh, it's only 15% wool, 40% cotton. Anyway, very nice sweater, very old. So, and it's got all kinds of nubbies on it. Gonna move you up just a bit. Alright. But it has seams on either side. So, were you able to see that? Seams. And I need to cut this on the fold, this pattern piece, the top part of the hat. There's the fold there. So this would be the back of the hat, and this would be the front. So I don't want a seam on the front of my toque. So I'm going to fold this sweater to the seam lines that are already on it. Oh, I think the sweater needs a good shaving. It's got all kinds of little nubbies on it. So let's see if this is going to fit on there after my big brilliant idea. I'm going to go right about here. So I might make another hat with the brim on it. Maybe I'll go to the top using this. Maybe. Maybe. I saved the sweater to make mittens. The hat will work, and I'll have lots left because I'm going to use a different fabric for the brim, although you could use the same one. Now let's see if I have this folded properly. So I could cut my pattern piece in half because I'm cutting this on the fold, but I'm just going to leave it as is. See if I have it all stretched out of shape. So now I just have to cut this out. You only need one piece for the top unless you're lining it, which I might do. And then we'll cut out the band. Alright, so now I need my band. Now I have a piece of ribbing here. Black wool ribbing, or partially wool. And I am going to cut out the band, which has to be 9.5 by 11.5. Can you see that? And we're going to cut it on the fold. So I have it upside down, so you could read it. So I'm just going to cut this out, the band. I did cut a lining out of some cat hair covered microfiber, and I have my sweater piece cut out. So if you're going to line it, if you have a loose sweater knit, could line it. And we're going to see if that works, and then we're going to sew it together. So we're going to cut out our 9.5 by 11.5 inch band on the fold. This is my fold right here. So get that cut out, and then we're going to sew it together. And I'm going to use my real fancy paperweight here, because it's just a rectangle that I'm cutting out. So I have my sweater. I have my piece of lining. I'm going to remove my pins, because this is quite loose. I don't want any draft in the rafters on my head. So I'm going to use Hetty, the pin cushion, my little hedgehog. So I have my lining, must have tool. Get rid of some of the lint off there. So now we're going to sew the seam together, part that was cut. And I also have my brim, or not my brim, my band. So I'm going to put right sides together. And I'm going to sew, it's the opposite end of the, this is the fold, so I'm going to sew them all in half. So right sides together. See if we can zoom out a little bit. There we go. A little bit better. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to put all my pieces right sides together, and I'm going to sew the cut line. See if you can see that. So 1/2 inch seam allowance on each one. And we should mark this middle, or no, I lied. This middle right here. So I'm going to stick a pin in there and a pin in here. Mark this middle. So now we're going to sew these at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm using a 14-inch needle and 14-inch needle. I'm using a size 14 and a 3 stitch length. I know these colors are very dark, it's hard to see, but this is what I had. So just and I didn't do a very good job at cutting this straight on the grain, but I think it'll still work. And then this is already right sides together. So this one as well, my lining. Now, this is something that you don't necessarily have to do, but I just sewed those all at once. I'm going to top stitch the seam open because it bugs me. I could trim it, or you could serge it or whatever, but I just top stitch it open. So I lay it flat, and I just sew down either side. You could use a larger stitch length if you wanted. I'm just going to, because we're going to fold the band in half. And I find the seam allowance gets in the way. And I'm going to do it on all of them, because when I lay that flat, it's not going to go anywhere. The seam allowance stays right there. It's kind of like fake ironing. A little fake ironing. So now my band is all ready to go. I got it folded in half. And I'm going to sew these seams open as well because I'm lining it. You could serge them. You could serge the seam if you were, or you could zigzag it or whatever, or just use pinking shears or something. This is because we're using an old sweater, I'm just going to sew these flat so when I put my lining together they're not going to be bulky. So I just top stitch them down right through lay the seam open and then just top stitch either side. All right, we're going to stay stitch our brim together. We're just going to put hopefully you can see this. This is our seam. We're just going to line the seam up that we just sewed flat. We're just going to stay stitch it. So now we are going to sew our V's together. So you just just line each one up and sew from here to here, and you should back stitch at the fold line. So we're just going to sew those together, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go around to each one, and I'm going to do that on the lining and the hat. I'm going to sew from here to there on each one until they're all sewn together, as you can see. All right, so I have all my darts sewn together, the V opening and the pattern that you should have had that we cut. Sewed all those together. So it should look like this. You should have a hole in the top of your hat. And this is where these pins, where we marked, which would be this part of the pattern right here, the middle. We're going to line the center front. So it should look like this. And we are going to sew along here, along the top, 1/2 inch rounded. I did press my seams open, so all your darts should line up. I didn't cut all my threads off, so I'm just going to put that in there. And my seams are lined up, my darts. So you're going to do a rounded, actually, maybe I'll draw a chalk line on there, maybe you'll be able to tell. Get rid of this. So I did the same thing to the lining, and I need another pin. And you're going to sew. It's kind of rounded. You're just going to sew the top shut. So if you're going to put in a pom-pom or something on your hat, now is the time, and you would line it up with your center, front, and back. And I assume they come on a string or something, and you would put your pom-pom inside the hat and have the string coming out here, and you would sew it on now. So we're going to sew that shut, and we're going to do the same thing on the lining. I have all my darts. I didn't press that one, I guess. I missed one. So I got those all sewn together. And I have the hole in the top. So now we're going to sew this line here. So now you can see I sewed the top of the hat. Now I'm going to trim it. Not real close. And cut off all my threads. Now I want to attach the lining to my hat. So for the lining not to fall out, and you can tell it looks a little smaller, so I want these to be facing each other, my two back seams, and I'm just going to tack it to the top of the hat. And I'm going to sew above the seam allowance, or in the seam allowance part, right here. Hopefully that will work. Sewing through all these layers, it's getting quite thick. And you don't even really need to sew across the whole thing. I'm just tacking it in place. Now I'm going to turn that. So I tacked it to the top seam right here. And I'm going to flip the lining over the hat. And I'm going to line it up as best I can because I'm using two different knits, so they're going to stretch different. Let's see if this is going to work. I think it's going to. So the next step would be to sew on our brim. Our band. Why do I keep doing that? So I'm going to stay stitch this in place, so when I sew the band on, everything is not going to move around. So I'm just going to stay stitch along the edge here. So I sewed the lining to the inside of my hat. I stay stitched around the outside. Now we want to put the brim on. So you want it, so this is what our hat is going to look like without the brim yet. our sweater part. It's got these nice darts. And are they lined up? That one's off a little bit, and that one's perfect. So, and if your pom-pom was in there, it would be right in the middle of the seam right here. So we want our hat to be inside out. So if you didn't line it, which is fine, it would be, the seams would be all showing. But because I lined this, no seams showing. So now we're going to take our back seams that we stay stitched, and we're going to slide the hat into the brim, into the band, sorry, get rid of this. And we're going to line up our seam allowances. So we have our back seam for the band and the back seam of our hat that we all stay stitched in place. So it's going to be quite thick to sew through. And we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around where we just stay stitched everything. So make sure you're, so line those up. And we can mark our hat if you would like. So there's my back seam right here. And we can put a pin there. We do the same as you would a neckband or sleeve band or something. So mark it in quarters. This lining wants to roll down. Good thing I stay stitched it. So I got my 4 markers there, and then do the same thing to the brim. Now I know this is the back seam, so I'm going to pin that, or you can use clips. And do it in quarters. And I'm going to line up my pins. And line this one up. And do the same on the last one. Making sure my lining isn't rolled down. Line up those pins. And then we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. And I'll have to stretch it a little bit because I have too many different knits happening here. But it doesn't look too bad actually. It's going to line up pretty good. I've never made one this way before, so we are learning together. So a 1/2 inch seam allowance or seam all the way around the band of your hat. So now I have my seam, my band is sewn. Look at the fuzzies. My band is sewn to the hat. So now we're going to sew again because there's going to be a lot of stress on this part of the hat from pulling it on and off. So you want to do another 1/4 inch seam, or you want to sew a 1/4 of an inch away from the seam you've already done towards here, right here. So you want to sew around it again, and then you can trim it or you can serge it. It's entirely up to you, or you can zigzag along it, but then you want to trim the bulk of the seam down as close to your stitching line as you can. I'm going to serge mine, see if my serger will go through all these layers. But so now we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the last seam we just did for added strength. So there, my seam is serged off. My serger didn't like going through the seam allowances. As you can see, that's a bit of a mess. But, or maybe you can't see. Anyway, so that part's done. So the hat is basically done. So now you're going to press this seam towards your hat. So this is the brim, and you're going to press the seam up there. Now I'm going to stitch that seam down. You don't have to, but because mine's quite thick, I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to stitch along here to hold that seam in place up against the hat. Alright, so there I sewed around here. I sewed my seam down. This is the inside of the hat that you can see right now. I sewed along here. I got a couple little puckers, but nothing serious. Where'd they go? One right there. Anyway, so let's turn it inside out so we can see what our recycled hat looks like out of an old sweater. So I'm going to turn it right side out, and you can, your seam line is supposed to be there, but you're not going to see it because you got to fold the brim up. So just slightly below, fold the brim up. You can go halfway or almost. I fold it up to there. And now the ultimate test, see if it fits. Now this was supposed to fit a 22-inch head. My head is about 23. So let's see if it fits my head. All right, where are we at? Put my glasses off. Let's see if it's good. It's not going to blow off my head. It's going to keep my ears warm. It's not too bulky up here. If I had a pom-pom, it would be sticking way up. And toques aren't meant to be pretty. They're meant to keep your head warm. So, there. Fits good. So there you have it. There's a toque. And we'll be back to make another brimless hat on the next part. So, hope you enjoyed that, and hope you make one. Keep your head warm. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.